The Legend of Heroes has a long and somewhat complicated backstory. The series originated as part of the Dragon Slayer series from Falcom back in 1989. After the first two entries, the series moved on to a trilogy of games that would become known as the Gagharv trilogy. Combined, these 5 games have been released on a wide spectrum of platforms, including the likes of the NEC PC 9801, the Sega Saturn, and even the original PlayStation. The PSP entries are remakes of the Gagharv trilogy, and this particular game in that trilogy was originally released on the NEC PC 9801 in 1996. For whatever reason, the North American Gagharv trilogy wasn't released in the same order as the original Japanese versions. The game you're seeing today, A Tear of Vermillion, is actually the second game in the trilogy released after Prophecy of the Moonlight Witch in Japan, which I'll be covering next week, as it was released here as The Legend of Heroes Part 2. And now I believe this was done as the story in A Tear of Vermillion takes place 56 years before the events of Prophecy of the Moonlight Witch. So, to wrap up, the first 2 releases were Dragon Slayer games. Then the next 3 releases established the Gagharv trilogy before the series would move on to the brilliant Trails in the Sky series, and eventually wrapping up with the modern Trails of Cold Steel series. Now, while the Sky and Steel series are by far the best of the bunch, there is something special about this earlier trilogy that's available exclusively on the PlayStation Portable in North America. A Tear of Vermillion was released on the PSP in North America in November of 2005, making it already a decade old. It was one of the earlier RPGs released on the platform before a wide assortment of excellent RPGs would grace the platform, as you've already seen with some of the reviews I've been covering lately. And as a matter of fact, this could have been the first RPG released in North America on the PSP. I'm not 100% sure. The truth of the matter is that even by 2005 standards, the original version of this game was released in 1996, and you can actually see it in the game's DNA. The story is absolutely jam-packed with cliches. You play as Avon, who grew up in the cathedral with his sister. One day, some evil person comes for his sister, and the two are separated. Wouldn't you know it, but Avon must set out on a quest to save his sister and put an end to this world-ending evil. The plot becomes very predictable over time, and even though there are tons of characters in the game, each with a massive amount of backstory, the overall theme is very, been there, done that. Sadly, one of the biggest issues with the game is the translation. Everything from Avon telling people, "Hi, my name is Avon, I'm a food fighter." That's right, a food fighter. All the way going to things like the leveling screen has errors in it. So for example, when your character learns a new spell, it'll say Avon was rare mastered. It's not bad enough that you won't understand the story, but it's very clear this was not handled by a AAA team. In terms of gameplay, it's extremely basic, like an old school Dragon Quest game. Spells are acquired by leveling up, weapons and armor need to be purchased from new shops that you find in towns, and enemy designs are recycled with simple color palette swaps. There is no new funky weapon or magic systems to be found here. The one and pretty much only modern RPG element is the fact that there are no random encounters. You can clearly see and avoid just about any enemy encounter. Enemies appear on the playfield, and if you touch them, you get sucked into battle. And I'm happy to report that the load times are quite minimal, which is a blessing as you'll be doing a lot of transitioning between the main playfield and battling countless enemies. The earliest portions of the game are a little bit too front-ended with story, and that means you have quite a lot to do before your very first battle encounter. While progressing through the game, you'll also notice that many of the quests require a fair bit of backtracking. A villager will send you off to run an errand, and then you'll return to the village only to have to leave a moment later to go back to the other village you were just at by the same NPC. There's also a simple pet raising component to the game, but overall, this is a really basic RPG. The graphics feature 2D sprites for characters and 3D polygons, which make up most of the environments. There's also nice portrait art for when the characters are speaking to one another, so it's not overly simplistic. For the most part, the game has quite a distinct look to it, and I'm happy to say that this graphical style continues throughout the rest of the trilogy. The only downside to the graphics are the lame battle animations. Here the game uses typically one background, and that's it. You don't get any sort of diversity as you go through the game. It typically, you'll have one static background for desert, one for forest, and so on. The music is actually much better than I remember it. Just about every tune I found was fitting and catchy. Sure, the music loops a little bit too often for my liking, but when it's good quality music, I can't really complain. Overall, The Legend of Heroes, A Tear of Vermillion is a fun but simple RPG. It has its fair share of issues, but it's certainly worth looking into considering its relatively low asking price. As of the time of this review, you can pick up a copy on eBay for only $10 to $15. I should warn you, however, that the sequels are significantly rarer and therefore much more expensive. This is one RPG trilogy that you could skip out on and focus on more of the Trails in the Sky series, because that's much better. But if you're interested, go ahead and check it out.